Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, gap analysis is designed to assist an organization in obtaining full compliance with the appropriate regulations, guidelines and or best practices standards. The resulting report will summarize the organization's current level of compliance and provide the details for developing appropriate corrective action. So, therefore, you understand that the team that will do this gap analysis have to be competent in every respect. So, the audit team may comprise persons from different areas, maybe some internal persons as well as outside persons, because all outside persons of course, they will take time to understand the nuances of this particular organization. Okay. So, there may be some internal members in the team also to assist them. Okay. The gap analysis process involves determining, documenting and obtaining management's recognition of the variance between the requirements set forth in the regulation, guideline and or the best practice standard and the organization's current information security program. Now, you see here it is focusing on the point that management's recognition of the variance, because if the authority that will implement or firstly change the security policy and then implement, if they do not understand where you are differing from the current standards, then obviously this whole exercise will be fruitless, right. So, you have to take them under confidence. Once the gaps are identified, a security improvement plan can be developed. This is a very oftly reported terminology. Security improvement plan can be developed that provides a foundation for setting priorities, assigning ownership, allocating investments of time, money and human resources and for measuring and improving compliance with the guidelines. So, this security improvement plan again is some other step which requires say you can say heavy investment with respect to all types of resources. Security gap analysis could take a lengthy period to comply with an organization's selected framework standards. So, during the analysis an organization might unearth some unpleasant discoveries, but that is the purpose as I have told you. The ultimate goal is to protect an organization from those that intend to harm it, which means finding these issues before the enemy finds it out. So, if you conduct gap analysis quite regularly, then of course, the issues will come up where there are holes and loopholes and you will have time to breach those gaps. So, so far you have heard the word controls so many times and we have earlier discussed about some physical controls only. So, now we can see what type of controls may be implemented. So, security controls are safeguards or countermeasures. They may be had to avoid, counteract or minimize the security risks. So, that means everybody knows that there will be security risks in some organization or in an institute. So, we may apply some control to find out whether the risk is real, whether the risk is in progress, whether the risk may happen at all these things we can find out. So, controls may be deployed. the classification of controls may be preventive, detective or corrective. So, preventive security control, as you understand, that it prevents, that means it never even considers that this can happen. Okay? So, stops the threats in its tracks, that means even the threat which I told that it is some passive form, I mean it has not actually occurred, but there is possibility that it can occur, that is threat, right, possible breach of security. So, preventive security control is something which will stop the threats in its tracks. You see preventive control, then the corrective control. So, corrective control, of course, you understand that it will be a corrective action, that means if something happens, then how will you decrease the impact. And similarly, there is another security control which is detective control, and from the name you understand what it will do, right. It will try to find out whether attacks are in progress, whether attacks are in the way, that means it will perform some detectiveness on your system. It will try to discover whether the attacks are in progress. Now, there may be further categorization of controls: physical controls, procedural controls, technical controls and compliance controls. I think we have already discussed about physical controls, and therefore, I am not going to discuss in details about the other types of controls, because the terminologies themselves are more or less, I mean, self explanatory. Okay. Procedural controls, that means the procedures other than technicalities, because there are so many things involved with a system. I mean, it may be as simple as that there will be shift duty for the system administrator. There will be two system administrator, one for the day, one for the night, there will be a roster, they will be changing their duty. So, that may be procedural control. Okay? That means, the process how the things are being implemented, and technical controls means, that means whether you are placing some IDS or some monitoring software, or you are writing your own controls. I mean, not only detective controls, this monitoring software basically will be detective control, right. So, you can have other types, that means you can also write down beforehand that if this attack occurs, this is the corrective control step we are going to take. Okay. And you may think that I will never allow in my organization this threat to occur. So, you take preventive control for that. So, these things will be your technical controls, will fall under the technical controls. And compliance controls, obviously that means you should never go on your ad hoc mode. You must follow the controls best practices or the standards that are being used. So, if somebody say that you must use antivirus software, okay, suppose it is mentioned in the standard control practice. So, you use that, okay, just like that. So, that is compliance controls, that whether you are complying with the standards followed in the industry. So, who will use these controls, right? I mean, shall everybody use this? So, basically risk aware organizations, that means not all organizations are very much aware of security, as you know, but some organizations that deal with sensitive data, okay, like say healthcare organizations, like say I mean fiscal organizations, etc., important data, and very sensitive data too. So, they will be more prone to use such types of controls. Risk aware organizations may choose proactively to specify, design, implement, operate and maintain their security controls. So, you see so many work or functions they have to do in implementing the controls. So, you have to specify, design. So, that means firstly you have to know what you want to do. Do you want to put all types of controls, say like here physical, procedural, technical and compliance all, or say you want to put only some compliance and technical, then if technical then which one among these, okay? All these things will come up. So, that is what is meant by specify and design. Then implementation. So, design means you are simply writing down the steps that in this way I will provide the control. So, implementation is, I mean, in the very core way, hard way, that the implementation may be that you are having a guard at the server room, and the finest implementation may be that you are having some IDS software. Okay. So, in this way you may differentiate. Operate and maintain, I mean not only you have to implement, but you have to maintain that also. Otherwise, if the guard you have appointed is a temporary one only for 6 months, then what will happen after 6 months? Okay. And suppose you have written some IDS, but some new signature has come up. So, won't you update? So, these are how you have to maintain. They usually assess the risks. Obviously, if some new pattern of attack has come up and it is not included in your system, then obviously it is a risk. The organizations will implement a comprehensive security management framework. It will be easier because it is already there following the ISO 27002 and the good practice for information security and NIST document also SP 853. So, these are regarded to be some of the best practices in the industry with respect to such implementation. So, why not follow this? Then your organization will be compliant also. Okay. So, you can easily follow this. Now, since we are talking about risk here, so we shall also have a very brief overview of risk, security risks. Now, why will you consider your organization to be risky? Right. I mean, obviously, given an opportunity, I will never consider my organization to be a risky. I will always think that all my data is safe and etcetera and etcetera, okay, whatever. But though I know that many a times there are some incidents, okay, and that is common for any organization. I mean, it is not only for a particular one, it is common for any. That is why we have to take the countermeasures. So, why risky? Because all organizations are exposed to uncertainties. Managing uncertainties is not an easy task. Now, uncertainties in what respect? Maybe here, since we are talking about security, so uncertainty in the form of, say, you are having a new software, you are having some upgradation, you are having something, say a new sort of network service provider, everything becomes uncertain at that point of time, because you have never dealt with all these things before. So, obviously, you have to be more vigilant. Okay. So, these may be the uncertainties. Risk management is nothing new. In software engineering principles, it was there right from the beginning. I think you have all studied software engineering or allied subjects, there is risk management. This risk management here we are talking specifically to security risk management, not the overall project risk management. And we also know that mitigating all risks is not possible. I mean, mitigating any of the difficulties, all difficulties at a time is always not possible, that all of us know. So, therefore, we have to find out which risks will cause what damage at what level. So, we can classify the risk, we can classify the damage, we can classify the occurrence of the risk, right, and in that way we can find out which one to cover with utmost importance. You understand? That means, there may be risk 1, risk 2, risk 3. Suppose we have identified the risks, okay? But suppose risk 1 occurs once in a lifetime, and maybe its impact, I mean damage impact is also low. So, we can never, I mean for the time being we may not consider it, but suppose risk 2, it may not occur much frequently, maybe say twice in a year or something like that, but the damage it causes is say 90%. So, of course, we will try to cover it. So, in this way you can classify. Okay. So, IT security professionals must have a tool set to assist them, obviously, because these are all very subjective, right. How do you assess that this is less risky, this is highly risky, and so on and so forth. So, maybe there can be some rule based, there can be some other type of tool set with different parameters, where you fit in the parameters and simply get the result back. This tool set obviously needs to be consistent, repeatable, cost effective, and also be able to reduce risks to a reasonable level. That means, this tool set may help you in not only identifying the risks given the parameters from your organization, but the levels, that means the risk levels, the damages it caused, and the mitigating plans. Because many a times you may find, suppose you have identified that I will cover this risk, but the mitigation cost may be simply prohibiting, okay, very very high. So, what will you do? Will you look into this, or you will say that no, I will then try to cover some other categories, because under that cost I may be able to cover many of the risks. So, this is a very very important decision to be taken by the management and the others involved. So, now what is risk? So, risk is the potential harm that may arise from some current process or from some future event of a system. Now, whenever there is the term potential, so you understand its effect. That means, it really has got some strength in it. So, if the risk becomes real, then definitely it will be harmful. Now, how much harmful? You have to decide. Now, along with risk, I mean why a risk would appear in a system at all? This question naturally comes. So, you see that there are certain flaws or weaknesses in the system, and since we are talking about security, so a flaw or weakness in the system security procedures, that means the way the system security is being implemented, the design, the implementation itself, that means the algorithms or the procedures, the internal controls that could be exercised, everything in any of these there may be some flaw, that means some error or some weakness, which becomes the vulnerable point. That means, it is not guarded. There is a chance, there is a probability that it may break down under certain pressure. Okay? So, that is the vulnerability. It may result therefore in a security breach or a violation of the system's security policy. So, the vulnerability may ultimately be the risky factor, because it can be broken under pressure and which will eventually lead to the security breach. So, risk is the probability of a vulnerability getting real, okay, and the resulting impact of that adverse event on the organization or the system. So, here this vulnerability is associated only with the different security related activities of the system, because we are talking about security risks, that is why. Okay, only security related activities like procedures, design, implementation, like that, or even in the controls, I think. So, the resulting impact of that adverse event. So, we are thinking that the event will definitely be adverse, because it is a breach of security of the system and the effect that it will bring onto the system. So, how will you assess it? Risk is assessed by identifying the threats and vulnerabilities, and then by determining the likelihood and impact for each risk. That is what I simply told you. Okay? That means, you have to first find out the threats lurking in the system and some very weak points which will become threats and which will ultimately be the breach of security point. So, then you have to determine the likelihood, that means, how frequently this may occur and the impact of each risk. Impact means that the effect that it will have had on the system. So, there is a quantitative risk assessment, okay, that draws upon the methodologies used by the financial institutions and insurance companies. By assigning values to information, systems, business processes, recovery costs, impact and therefore risk can be measured in terms of the direct and indirect costs. Okay. So, that means, some mathematical formulae exist, and these firstly every every asset of the system is provided some value. Okay. Information, systems, business process, these are all assets of your system, right. Okay. And here you can also add your physical hardware of the system too, okay, because many a times you have servers without which it is impossible to work. I mean, it is a specialized one only for this particular purpose, right. So, that has to be added, because if it gets affected, everything dies down. Okay. So, you can, in this list you can just simply go on adding. So, you assign values, suppose you draw up a scale 1 to 100 and the most valuable asset that you think, you give it 100, and say the least valuable, say for example, toner, you can give it 1, like that. Okay. And then you can again have a tool which will consider, say, the ranges between, say, 30 to 80, like that. In that way we grade. So, you can do anything. Since it is quantitative, so obviously there will be a qualitative evaluation of risk also, right. So, qualitative risk assessment, as you can understand from the terminology itself, qualitative risk assessment assumes that there is a great degree of uncertainty in the likelihood and impact, and whenever it is qualitative, it is very, very subjective in nature, is not it, because I may think that it is not very important, but you may think that it is really very important. Okay. So, this is very subjective. So, you can put risk categories as high, medium, low, like that, impact categories also like that, and then you assign, ultimately you can assign some values and then you can find out the probability. Okay. So, this is how qualitatively you can also assess the risk. So, there are 4 basic strategies for managing risk, obviously mitigation, transference, acceptance and avoidance. Mitigation means you are drawing up a plan. Okay. Acceptance, what does acceptance mean? Therefore, as if you are telling that okay, this will happen, is not it? You have taken for it that okay, if this happens what can I do, like that. But in some way it will also help, because you will not always then I mean go out of your way to mitigate that particular risk. Transference, that means suppose you have the server under some warranty period. Okay. So, you know that if something happens within this period, you do not have to bear the cost. So, as if you are transferring the effect to somebody else, and of course, avoidance is always a policy, but for that as you know that you may have to be more I mean you come into a more restrictive environment, because you are not allowing many things right from the beginning, maybe right from when the system has started or not. Okay. So, for each risk management strategy, the cost associated with the strategy and the basic steps for achieving the strategy, that means the plan of action and milestones must also be determined. So, for each of them, that means you first of all you have to find out which one will you take, and then find out whether all of your assets can follow this particular strategy. Okay. Suppose you took mitigation. So, you start finding out the risk, the particular assets it will affect, the degree of effect, all these are there. So, now you find out the plan of action and milestones, that means milestones here, that means plan of action you understand, and in what regular intervals or what intervals you will do what. Maybe one of the action may be simply reviewing also the system from time to time. Okay. So, these must be drawn out. So, we can end our discussion